Hey, Dr. SheRich here. I am so excited about the release of my first episode of my podcast, Surviving with SheRich. This particular episode is entitled Survivor's Voice, and it's my story. It's the story of how I turned my pain into power and moved from surviving to thriving. And so, as you watch today, I hope it really inspires you to be able to look at the pain of your past and be empowered by that. And so, as you watch, if it blesses you, I just ask that you not only share it with somebody else, but also subscribe to this channel. So, again, I hope you enjoy it. It is episode 1 of Surviving with SheRich, Survivor's Voice, Sherri's journey from trauma to triumph. Welcome to Surviving with SheRich, the podcast where we help those silenced by trauma regain their voice. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Richardson. Join my guests and me as we share inspiring stories of resilience and practical steps toward healing within a supportive community. Thank you for tuning in, and let's get started on this empowering journey from trauma to triumph, surviving to thriving, one story at a time. Hello, all. I am Dr. Sherri Richardson. Many of you know me as Dr. SheRich, and I am so excited about launching my first 2 episodes of my podcast, Surviving with SheRich. As I stated in the opening, I am a survivor, and I'll share my story momentarily, but one of the things that held me for years was I suffered in silence for many, many years. And so as I prepared to record this podcast, God has really been working on my heart and strengthening me and reminding me that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. And so as I share my story with you in both episode 1 and episode 2 of this podcast, I really hope and pray that someone's heart is stirred, someone regains their voice, someone comes to know Christ, and that people are set free as a result of me sharing my story. So I am thankful that you have joined today, and I encourage you, if you are happy with this content and it blesses you in any way, that you definitely share it, especially if you know someone who can benefit from it also. And I also ask that you like and that you also subscribe. So I wanted to start off pretty much just telling you a little bit about me, especially for people who are new to me and may not know me. I am, like I said, a survivor. Childhood trauma in different forms has touched my life and transformed me in ways that I never imagined. But what I realize and recognize is by regaining my voice, I regain my strength. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why I decided to launch this podcast, Surviving with SheRich. As you listen to my story, as I share different things, I want you to dig deep, and I want you to really, really face the pain of your past so that you can be free and move forward and change the trajectory of your future and the generations that follow you. So I'm going to start off by saying I am one of 7 children. Many people who know me are probably looking at the screen like, 7? I know about 1 or I know about 2. But I have 6 siblings. I have 3 sisters and I have 3 brothers, one of which is with the father, and I miss him tremendously. I love you, Brian. But I have 6 siblings, and that actually is the result of very blended family. My biological parents divorced when I was young. I don't even remember if I can remember times that they were even together. But I was very young when they divorced. And both my mom and my dad remarried. And so through the blendedness of our family, I ended up being one of seven. My childhood was very rocky. I would say it was a roller coaster ride. Um, Many ups, but many downs, many highs and many lows. But through it all, God showed me truly, as his word says, that he will never leave me nor forsake me. He is with me always. And when I look back in retrospect over my life, I truly see his hand of grace and mercy and protection just keeping me as life was lifing. So as I said earlier, I experienced parents divorcing. So we know how traumatic that can be. I also experienced childhood abandonment. I knew where my dad was, my biological father, but we were not really close. I think back to being young and just wanting him, wanting to spend time with him, wanting to be in his presence, wanting to know what we had in common. And I always knew where he lived. I always knew how to get in contact with him. We just did not spend a lot of time together. And even when we called, like I realized as I got older, the majority of the time I called him. I reached out to him. And you would figure, since so much time went between he and I talking, that we would have a lot to talk about. And unfortunately, most of our conversations were probably 2 minutes or less. I didn't realize at the time just how deeply rooted childhood abandonment can be and can feel, and the tentacles that can grow out of it. But as I grew and I got older and had my own children and was in my first marriage and ultimately in my second marriage, I said, wow, the decisions that I made and the things that I did, a lot of them stemmed from my childhood abandonment issues with my dad. And I don't doubt that he loved me. I know he loved me. I just also know that for whatever the situation was and whatever my parents dealt with in their separation or their divorce, he just felt it was better, I guess, not to be involved, not realizing the pain and the hurt that put in me as a child. And so my parents both, like I said, remarried. My dad remarried my wonderful stepmother, who is absolutely amazing. And we have an awesome relationship. That's one thing I want you guys to understand. Even though I'm sharing my story of hurt and pain, I don't have regrets with the relationships that have been built. My stepmom, my bonus mom, and my siblings from that marriage are a blessing to me, and I love them wholeheartedly. I just know and wish that some things would have been a little bit different had I not lost my voice. Childhood abandonment silenced me in a way because what I realized is at a very early age, I did not trust men. If the person that birthed me didn't want to deal with me and didn't spend time with me, why would anybody else want to? And so that hurt and that pain, that rejection that I felt went and carried well into my adulthood. On top of the divorce, on top of the childhood abandonment, my mom remarried. And so, again, I love my stepfather, but he had his own issues. And as a result of whatever he was dealing with, he ended up molesting me. So from ages 4 to 17, and a lot of people do not know that I was molested between that time. And it was difficult because I learned how to mask. I really, really learned how to mask my emotions. I knew how to cover things up. I knew how to function in dysfunction. It was something that I learned too well. And again, it followed me well into my adult years. And it was difficult. It was difficult because I never felt that my voice mattered or that I even had the strength to speak up and share it. Part of me thinks back and I said, I wonder if I had a better relationship with my biological father, if I would have felt more comfortable talking about some of the things that I dealt with, which may have, you know, stopped some of those years of pain and experiences, but I don't know because the trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma silenced me and allowed me to function in ways that continued to be hurtful to me. And so when I think back to that and I think back to those times and I look back over my life, I am so grateful to God. I'm so thankful to Him because He kept me. He kept me when I did not want to be kept. He kept me when I was dealing with anxiety, when I was dealing with major depression, when I was suicidal, when I was promiscuous and reckless with my decisions and my lifestyle. He kept me through a teenage pregnancy and termination that I thought would take me out because of the mental guilt and the shame and the heaviness that I carried for years. And that was something that, again, emotionally, I didn't even think I would get through. But I say all that to say, when we allow trauma to be unresolved, when we don't face the pain of our past, some of or many of our behaviors and decisions that come out of that just keep us in a cycle of unhealthy and dysfunctional behavior. So I think back, I'm going to go back a little bit. I know I shared a lot already, but I I think back to me as a young girl. I tell people I'm from New Jersey. And I say that because, again, I was born in South Jersey. I was raised in North Jersey. And now I reside in Central Jersey. And so when people say, oh, where are you from? I'm like, New Jersey, just all over New Jersey. Um, but when I was young, I lived in a predominantly Black, predominantly minority area. And I was a very angry child because of the trauma that I dealt with and the situation that I was dealing with made me very, very angry. I was always an intelligent young lady. I did well in school, but I was a fighter. I was mouthy. And so my report card was the one that kind of looked like Sherri is a intelligent young lady, or Sherri is a phenomenal student, but and then all the dots come. She's too talkative, she's mouthy, and again that stemmed from the fact that as a child I didn't know how to manage my emotions. I didn't even know why I was feeling some of the things that I was feeling. And I definitely did not understand why I was not protected by the men that God placed, or the men that were in my life who were supposed to protect me as a young girl. I didn't understand all of that. And so my way of acting that out, or my behaviors that manifested, were anger, fighting, mouthiness, those things. And so my mom and my stepdad made a decision when I was in fourth grade to move our family up to an area that was, I won't even say predominantly white. My school had no Black people in it before my sister and I got there. Like we were the only ones. And I remember the very first day of school, I had a buddy, she was with me, and we went to the water fountain. And this young boy walked up behind me and he decided he wanted to call me the N-word on my very first day of this new school, which was obviously a culture shock. And so to now have to deal with that, I was rejected by my father, abused by my stepfather. Now I'm dealing with more rejection and trying to figure out who I am and where I fit in, and how I can just manage my life. And what I found really worked for me was sports. I did really well in sports. I was a natural athlete. I loved all kinds of sports growing up. But as I moved into high school, actually middle school, it started in middle school. You have practices after school. You practice Monday through Friday. When you're in high school, you probably practice Monday through Saturday. You have games that run into the evening. You have games and meets on Saturdays. And what I realized, not at the time, but as I got older, and again, I worked through the issues of my past, what I realized was I engrossed myself in sports because that was my medication. It was where I excelled. It was where I was accepted. It was where I felt confident in myself. But it also kept me safe because I was not home. I was at practice. I was at games. I was, involved in activities that kept me away from home and therefore kept me safe. And so, again, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, all of these things I didn't realize at the time I was involved in, but the reasoning for it stemmed all the way back to deeply rooted, unresolved trauma that I was dealing with from my childhood. So, fast forward to my adult life. I married very young. Again, another decision based out of my trauma because I had unconscientiously made a decision in my mind that I was not going back home after I graduated from college. I was not. I graduated on a Friday. I started working that next Monday. Like I had a job where I did my internship, and I worked with youth who were just dealing with so many different issues in their life. They used to call them at risk. We don't call them at risk anymore. They are children who dealing with issues and struggles. And so many of them, poor decisions, ended up in the youth detention center that I worked at. But I graduated that Friday. I started working that Monday. Right before I graduated, I met my first husband. And the timing, the way that it worked out worked for me because it gave me that reason not to go back home. We ended up dating for a short period of time. We moved in together, we got married. And again, this was all within like a year's time. And I'm going to say this again because I want to be really, 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 really clear. I do not have regrets. Every experience that I have gone through in my life has prepared me for this particular moment, for the ministry that God put in me, for the assignment and the purpose. So I want to be very clear when I say that. I do not have regrets. I don't. It still does not negate the fact that the decisions that I made were not always in my best interest. And so my decision to marry at a very young age, I was 24 when I got married, and it was a lot of work. But that decision was made because unconscientiously I said I wasn't going home. I was not returning back to an environment that created or caused me to be fearful. Um, and so I thank God because I hit a very, very low place when I got married. My marriage was hard. Um, it was filled with a lot of issues, I would say. We had some great times, but we had some not so great times as well. And I had my children young. My first beautiful princess was born when I was 25. My second one was born when I was 27. Being a young wife, a young mother with unresolved trauma who was dealing with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, anger, rage at times, like so many issues of brokenness. But I thank God for my daughters because I remember after I had my second daughter, I was at a very, very, very low point. I felt like I was raising my children a lot of the times on my own. That wasn't the case, but that's how I felt at the time. I felt like, they were everywhere I was, and I was the main person who supported and poured into them. And when you're looking from a lens of your life experiences, it's not always right, but that's your perspective. And so at the time, that's how I felt. And so I remember being so depressed that I did not want to get out of bed. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to. Um, and I remember saying, you have these two beautiful babies who cannot take care of themselves and who need their mom. And so when I didn't have a reason, my girls were my reason. When I didn't feel like getting up, when I didn't feel like working, when I didn't feel like moving, I just wanted to lay there. Um, my girls were my reason. And so I am indebted to God. I am indebted to them because they kept me going at a point in time that I didn't want to. Transparency. I didn't want to. I dealt with major depression now that I look back in retrospect, the majority of my life. I was sad. I was overwhelmed. I could sit in a room full of people and be the center of attention. It could be my birthday party. And I could be in a room full of people who were celebrating me and feel like I was the only one there because I felt so alone, and so lonely. And it was heavy and it was hard, but I masked it. I put on that mask. I served in my church. I excelled on my job. I elevated. I got promotions, and it looked like I had it all together when I was dying inside, literally dying. And when I know it was nobody but God who allowed me to get through that season of my life. And notice I said it was a season of my life. It was a season. God knew I would come out of it. Not only would I come out of it, I would come out of it triumphant and victorious. I would come out of it stronger and better and closer to Him. I didn't know at the time, but He did. Because He knows our end from our beginning. Because He knows every single moment of our life, where we're going to be and what we're going to do and how the story is going to end. I didn't realize, but He did. And so in that season of time, I didn't come out of that till I was 32 years old. 32 years old by the time I actually came out of that major depression. And mind you, there were times after that, it continued to tap me on my shoulder, tap me on my shoulder. But what I realized was through God, all things are possible. What I realized was the power of using my voice. When I was in high school, I got along with a lot of people, but I only had a very, very small, close circle. And even out of my small, close circle, I had one friend who I told about my abuse. Only one. And I loved and appreciated her because she and her mom took me, they covered me, they provided a safe haven for me. I spent a lot of time at her house. And her mom has gone on to be with the Lord, and I miss her tremendously. But I loved that she loved me. She never judged me. She always encouraged me, and she allowed me a safe space during a certain time period in my life. When I got older, I realized that how important that was, and that it allowed me to get through a difficult time in my life. And so one of the things that I always did, and I'm realizing now, even as I speak on this podcast, I'm realizing now, I always opened my home up to my students, um, kids who adopted me as their godmother, to my daughter's friends. Like, I always opened up my home, and I'm realizing now, literally, as I am recording this podcast, that it's because I wanted to make sure kids were safe, that they had a safe space to go and to be where they can be at peace, where they can rest. And I thank God for that. I thank God for that. I didn't realize it until this moment. But that is, again, another decision I made out of my childhood. Um, but I'm grateful, again, as I think back and I look back, and I'm so much stronger than I was. A turning point in my life came when I started attending my old church. And I'm going to go into the specifics of that in my next episode, because with this one, what I really wanted to do was lay the foundation. I wanted you to hear the story. I wanted you to walk with me through my journey of turning that pain into power and that trauma into triumph. And so in this episode, I wanted you to know who I was and get to know me. I wanted you to see what was the root of that pain and that trauma and the many decisions that I made, and also my low point, that low point where I just didn't want to live. I did not want to continue on this earth because it was just too painful. And what I'm going to share next in my next episode, episode 2 of this particular podcast, is my turning point. When did it change? What happened at the age of 32 that caused me to go from rock bottom back up to elevation and joy and purpose and peace? What strategies did I hold on to? What resources were available? What supports did I have? I'm going to share those with you at our next episode. And so, my final thought and my final prayer is that, again, as you listen to my story, that you take some time to really reflect and look in retrospect over your life and see, what are those things? What is the real root of my behaviors as an adult, as a young person? Where's it coming from? And as you sit in that and as you reflect on that, let God work on your heart. Acknowledgement was one of the first things I needed to do. And the second thing was forgiveness. As difficult as it was for me, I had to forgive my mother, my father, my stepfather, my stepmother. I had to forgive my siblings because I was angry with them for having a life I thought I should have had. Again, that was my perspective, not necessarily the truth. I had to forgive myself because there were so many decisions I made that were reckless, harmful to me and harmful to other people. So I had to forgive myself. So I had to acknowledge and I had to forgive. And both of those have been continuous part of my process. It's not a one and done. It continues. And so as you finish watching this first episode, that is my prayer for you. That's my desire for you. That you think back to the root of that issue and how it has affected your decisions, your behaviors. And so the next time we come together, I want to share with you some of the things that I did to work through it so that I can get to this place where I am, where I can share my story without bursting into tears and crying hysterically in a corner. But I can speak it, my truth. This is my truth. This is not anyone else's. It's mine. I can speak it with strength so that someone else and their life can be changed, so that my children and my children's children will not have to experience the things that I went through. That is why I'm doing what I do. So again, I thank you so much for tuning in. I pray again that this blessed you. If it did bless you, and also you know someone that it can be a blessing to, again, I encourage you, please share it. And then please like and subscribe to my YouTube page. It's a little light right now, but I promise you, I will continue to give you resources that will bless you and encourage you, information that will help you as we move forward from trauma to triumph, surviving to thriving, one story at a time. Be blessed. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Surviving with SheRich. If this content helped you, hit like, subscribe, and share. And remember to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Dr. SheRich4.